3 days passed quietly at the restaurant. Chuck had convinced Colonel Morrison to let Zip stay under his protection, while the government figured out what to do. Zip was getting stronger and had learned more English words by watching television and talking with the restaurant staff. The little alien was curious about everything and seemed to enjoy human food, especially the ice cream. Chuck's employees had been told that Zip was a special guest who needed to stay hidden for security reasons. Maria Santos had taken to cooking special meals for him, and Lisa Parker taught him card games during slow periods. Pete Williams helped Chuck set up a comfortable sleeping area in the office. Everyone treated Zip like family, and the young alien seemed happy for the first time since arriving on Earth. But Chuck knew this peace would not last long. He had dealt with enough hostile aliens to know that they usually came looking for their property. The Kethmori would not give up easily, and they would have ways of tracking Zip to Earth. Chuck spent his time preparing for what he knew was coming. On the morning of the 4th day, Chuck woke up to his phone ringing. Colonel Morrison's voice sounded urgent when Chuck answered. "Chuck, we have a problem. Our satellites are picking up 3 large ships approaching Earth. They just decloaked near the moon, and they are not responding to our communication attempts." Chuck looked over at Zip, who was eating breakfast and watching cartoons on the small television. "Let me guess. They look like the kind of ships that would belong to lizard people who like to enslave other species. How did you know that?"
Never mind, I should have expected you would figure it out.
"They are demanding to speak with Earth's leaders about the return of stolen property. Chuck, I think they are here for your little friend." Chuck felt his anger building. "Tell them that Earth does not negotiate with slave traders. Jake, and get your people ready for a fight, because something tells me these Kethmori are not going to take no for an answer." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Chuck, you are officially retired. You do not have to get involved in this. We can handle the situation. That kid is under my protection, Jake. Anyone who wants to hurt him is going to have to go through me first. That is just how it is." Chuck hung up the phone and turned to Zip. "Little buddy, we might have some visitors today. I need you to stay close to me and do exactly what I tell you, okay?" Zip's large eyes went wide with fear. "Kethmori come for me? They find me here." Chuck knelt down and put his hands on Zip's small shoulders. "They might try, but they are going to have to deal with me and every other human on this planet who believes in protecting children. You are not going anywhere with those monsters." An hour later, the first Kethmori ship landed in the parking lot of the restaurant. The massive vessel was black and covered with weapons that looked like they could destroy buildings. Chuck had cleared all the customers and most of his staff from the building, but he stayed along with Pete, Maria, and Lisa, who refused to leave. Chuck walked out into the parking lot to meet whatever came out of that ship. He was wearing his best cowboy boots and his favorite Texas hat. If he was going to face aliens who wanted to enslave children, he was going to do it looking like the proud Texan he was. The ship's door opened with a loud hiss, and 3 figures stepped out. The Kethmori were even bigger than Chuck had expected. They were at least 8 feet tall with dark green scaly skin and yellow eyes that looked cold and mean. They wore black armor that covered most of their bodies and carried weapons that hummed with energy. The leader of the group stepped forward and spoke in heavily accented English. "I am Captain Vexthar of the Kethmori Empire. You will return our property immediately, or face the consequences of interfering with imperial business." Chuck looked up at the alien captain and did not move from where he stood. "Well, Captain Vexthar, I am Chuck Norris and I own this restaurant. That child you are looking for is not your property. On Earth, we do not allow people to own other people, especially children." Vexthar made a sound that might have been laughter. "You're just a primitive human. You cannot possibly understand the laws of the galaxy. The Veltar are a conquered species and belong to the Empire. Return the young one now and we will not harm your pathetic world." By now, news crews had arrived and were filming everything from a safe distance. Crowds of people were gathering to watch the confrontation. Chuck could see police cars and military vehicles surrounding the area, but he had asked them to stay back unless he called for help. "In Texas, we have a saying, Captain," Chuck said in his calm drawl. "We do not negotiate with bullies, and we sure do not hand over kids to monsters." Vexthar's eyes flashed with anger. "You dare insult the Kethmori Empire. You will learn to respect your superiors, human." The captain gestured to his 2 soldiers and they raised their energy weapons. Chuck could see the weapons charging up with power that could probably punch holes through concrete. The crowd behind him gasped and some people started running away. Chuck stood his ground and did not even flinch. You boys better think real careful about what you do next. You see, I have been dealing with alien bullies for 40 years, and I have never met one yet that could back up all their big talk. Vexthar snarled and gave an order in his own language. The first soldier fired his weapon directly at Chuck. The energy blast was bright enough to hurt people's eyes and hot enough to melt steel. But when the light faded, Chuck was still standing exactly where he had been. The energy blast had hit something invisible around him and scattered harmlessly. That was your one free shot, Chuck said, stepping forward. Now let me show you how we handle bullies in Texas. Chuck moved faster than the cameras could follow. 1 second he was 10 feet away from the Kethmori soldiers, and the next second he was between them. His first punch sent the soldier who had fired at him flying backward into the side of their ship with a loud clang. His roundhouse kick caught the second soldier in the chest and launched him 20 feet through the air. Captain Vexithar roared in anger and swung his own weapon toward Chuck, but Chuck caught the weapon in his bare hands and crushed it like it was made of paper. Then he grabbed the 8-foot-tall alien captain and lifted him over his head. You want to know what happens to people who try to hurt children in my restaurant? Chuck asked. Then he threw Vexthar through the air. The alien captain landed hard on the asphalt and did not get up for several minutes. The crowd behind Chuck erupted in cheers and applause. People were taking pictures and videos with their phones. Chuck could hear someone shouting, USA, 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 and car horns honking in celebration. Chuck walked over to where Vexthar was struggling to get back on his feet. You have 2 choices, Captain. You can get back in your ship and leave Earth alone, or you can find out what happens when you really make Chuck Norris angry. What is it going to be? Captain Vexthar struggled to his feet and looked at Chuck with hatred in his yellow eyes. His armor was cracked and green blood dripped from cuts on his scaly face. The other 2 Kethmori soldiers were still lying unconscious near their ship. This is not over human, Vexthar snarled. You have made an enemy of the entire Kethmori Empire. We will return with a full battle fleet and your world will burn for this insult. Chuck adjusted his cowboy hat and gave the alien captain a cold stare. You do that, Captain. But when you come back, you better bring everything you have, because Earth is not going to roll over for you or anyone else. Vexthar gestured angrily at his fallen soldiers. Get up, you fools. We are leaving this miserable planet. The 2 soldiers slowly got to their feet, looking dazed and embarrassed. They had never been defeated by a single opponent before, especially not an old human. The 3 aliens retreated to their ship without another word. The massive vessel rose into the air and disappeared with a flash of light. Chuck stood in the parking lot watching until he was sure they were really gone. The crowd of humans behind him was still cheering and taking pictures. Within hours, video of Chuck's fight with the Kethmori had spread around the world. News stations played it over and over again. Social media was flooded with posts about the man who stood up to alien bullies. People everywhere were calling Chuck a hero and saying that Earth would never bow down to alien threats. But Chuck knew this was just the beginning. He had dealt with enough hostile alien species to understand how they thought. The Kethmori would not accept being humiliated by what they considered a primitive world. They would come back with more ships and more weapons, and they would want revenge. Colonel Morrison arrived at the restaurant that evening with a team of military advisors. They set up a temporary command center in the dining room while Chuck and Zip stayed in the office. Morrison looked worried when he sat down across from Chuck. The president wants to know what we are dealing with, Chuck. Our intelligence on the Kethmori is limited, but what we do know is not good. They control at least 50 star systems and have been expanding their empire for centuries. Zip looked up from his coloring book when he heard the name Kethmori. They very bad people, Colonel Jake. Take whole worlds and make everyone slaves. Have big ships with many weapons. Chuck put his hand on Zip's shoulder. Tell the colonel what you told me about how they fight, little buddy. Zip's large eyes became serious. Kethmori think they better than everyone. Use fear to make people give up without fighting. But they not used to people who fight back. When enemies resist, they get angry and make mistakes. Morrison leaned forward with interest. What kind of mistakes? They attack with anger, not smart plans. Send too many ships to one place. Leave other places weak. Also, they fear losing face in front of other aliens. If they lose battles, other species might rebel. Chuck nodded. The kid has been studying them his whole life, Jake. He knows how they think and how they fight. We need to use that. Over the next few days, Chuck's restaurant became the center of Earth's defense planning. Military leaders from around the world came to meet with Chuck and learn from Zip. The young alien's knowledge of Kethmori technology and tactics was invaluable. Zip drew detailed pictures of Kethmori ships and weapons. He explained how their shields worked and where the weak points were located. He also told them about other alien species that the Kethmori had enslaved and where those worlds were located. Many species want to be free, Zip explained to the gathered military officers, but they afraid to fight alone. If they see humans standing up, maybe they find courage too. Chuck's restaurant staff became unlikely advisors in humanity's first interstellar war. Pete Williams had a gift for logistics and helped plan supply lines for the coming battle. Maria Santos used her chemistry knowledge to develop new types of ammunition that would be effective against Kethmori armor. Lisa Parker became Earth's first ambassador to alien refugees when more escaped slaves began, arriving on Earth seeking protection. News of Chuck's stand against the Kethmori spread through alien communication networks across the galaxy. Refugee ships from a dozen different species began appearing near Earth. They brought with them stories of Kethmori cruelty and information about the Empire's military capabilities. Chuck found himself meeting with beings that looked nothing like humans but who all shared the same desire for freedom. There was Grok, a rock-like creature whose people had been enslaved for mining operations. There was Whisper, a gas being whose species had been captured and used as living computers. There was Nova, a plant-like alien whose world had been strip-mined for resources. Each refugee brought valuable intelligence about Kethmori weaknesses and tactics. They also brought hope that the Empire could be defeated if enough worlds stood together against it. Chuck realized that Earth's fight was becoming a symbol for oppressed species everywhere. The basement of Chuck's restaurant was converted into a war room filled with star charts and tactical displays. Chuck spent his days training Special Forces units in techniques that proved surprisingly effective against alien physiology. His years of fighting different species had taught him exactly where to hit to cause maximum damage. The key is not to fight them like humans, Chuck explained to a group of Navy SEALs. Each species has different weak points and different fighting styles. The Kethmori are strong and tough, but they are also slow and predictable. Use that against them. 3 weeks after Vexithar's defeat, the Kethmori returned in force. Long-range sensors detected a massive fleet approaching Earth from deep space. There were over 200 ships of various sizes, all armed with weapons capable of destroying cities. Colonel Morrison called an emergency meeting in Chuck's war room. "They will be here in 6 hours, Chuck. Our military is ready, but we are seriously outnumbered. The president is asking if we should try to negotiate." Chuck looked at the tactical display showing the approaching alien fleet. Then he looked at Zip, who was sitting quietly in the corner drawing pictures of his family that he might never see again. "Jake, you tell the president that Chuck Norris does not negotiate with child slavers. We fight and we win, or we go down swinging. But we do not give up and we do not give in." Chuck stood up and addressed everyone in the room, including the alien refugees who had chosen to stand with humanity. "Folks, we are about to face the biggest fight in Earth's history. But we are not fighting alone, and we are not fighting for conquest or glory. We are fighting for the simple idea that every being in the universe has the right to be free. That is something worth fighting for." The room erupted in cheers from humans and aliens alike. Outside in the restaurant, Chuck could hear his staff preparing for what might be their last service. But they were not running away or hiding. They were standing with their boss and their new alien friends because that was what humans did when someone needed protection. Chuck stepped into the freezer and looked around carefully. The cold air made his breath visible and frost covered everything inside. Boxes of frozen vegetables were stacked against the walls and hanging meat filled one corner. At first he did not see anything unusual, but then he heard the cry again. It was coming from behind a stack of boxes near the back wall. Chuck moved the boxes aside gently and found something that made him stop and stare. A small creature was huddled in the corner, shivering from the cold. It was about 3 feet tall with large round eyes that looked up at him with fear. Its skin was a light blue color but was getting darker as the cold affected it. The creature looked young, maybe a child of whatever species it was. The alien tried to back away further into the corner, but there was nowhere to go. Its large eyes were filled with tears and it made soft whimpering sounds. Chuck could see that it was terrified and probably had been hiding in the freezer for hours. The poor thing was nearly frozen and looked like it might not survive much longer in the cold. Chuck knelt down slowly and held out his hands to show he meant no harm. He spoke in a soft voice even though he was not sure the creature could understand him. "Hey there, little one. I am not going to hurt you. You must be freezing in here. Let me help you get warm." The creature looked at him with those big eyes and seemed to understand that Chuck was trying to help. It reached out one small hand toward him and Chuck gently took it. The skin felt cold as ice and the creature was shaking badly. Chuck carefully picked up the small being and carried it out of the freezer. It weighed almost nothing and felt fragile in his arms. Pete Williams was waiting outside the freezer with a worried look on his face. When he saw Chuck carrying the alien creature, his mouth fell open in shock. Pete had known about Chuck's secret past, but he had never seen an actual alien before. He started to say something, but Chuck shook his head and motioned for him to stay quiet. Chuck carried the creature to his office at the back of the restaurant and closed the door. He set the alien down gently in a chair and turned up the heat. The creature was still shivering and its blue skin was starting to return to a lighter color as it warmed up. Chuck grabbed a blanket from his couch and wrapped it around the small being. "There you go. That should help you warm up," Chuck said softly. The creature looked up at him and made a sound that might have been thank you in its own language. Chuck could see intelligence in those large eyes and knew this was not just some animal. This was a person from another world who needed help. Chuck picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he had not used in 2 years. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Department of Xenological Affairs, Colonel Jake Morrison speaking." "Jake, it's Chuck. I have a situation at my restaurant that you need to know about." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Chuck, you are supposed to be retired." "What kind of situation are we talking about?" "The alien kind. I found a small being hiding in my freezer. It looks young and scared and definitely not hostile. I need your team here, but I want to handle this carefully." Colonel Morrison sighed. "I will have a team there in 30 minutes. Do not let anyone else see the creature, and do not let it leave the building. We will take care of everything when we arrive." Chuck hung up the phone and looked at the alien child. It had stopped shivering and was looking around the office with curiosity. When it saw the pictures on Chuck's, it made excited sounds and pointed at the photos of Chuck with various military people and government officials. "You can tell these are important people, can you?" Chuck said. The creature nodded and then did something amazing. It started to speak in broken English with a high-pitched voice. "You, leader, warrior. Pictures show, you fight, protect others." Chuck was surprised. "You can speak English. How did you learn?" The creature touched its head with one small finger. "We, Veltar, learn fast. Watch your broadcasts from space. Learn languages quick." "Veltar is what your people are called?" Chuck asked. The creature nodded. "My name. Translation is Zip. I run from bad ones. Kethmori take my family. Make slaves. I escape but ship crash near here. Hide in food truck. End up in cold place." Chuck felt his anger rising as he listened to the story. Someone had enslaved this child's family, and now the kid was alone and scared on a strange world. "The Kethmori are the ones who took your family?" Zip nodded sadly. "Big lizard people, very mean. Take whole planets. Make everyone slaves. My people gentle. Cannot fight back." Chuck knelt down next to Zip's chair. "Well, you are safe now, little one. Nobody is going to hurt you while I am around." Before Zip could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Chuck opened it to find Pete Williams looking nervous. "Chuck, there are some government people here asking for you. They have badges and official-looking cars outside." Chuck nodded. "Send them back here, Pete, and make sure nobody else comes this way. Tell the staff that we are having a private business meeting." A few minutes later, Colonel Morrison entered the office with 3 other agents. When they saw Zip sitting in the chair wrapped in a blanket, their expressions became very serious. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair who had worked with Chuck for many years. The other agents were younger and looked excited to see their first real alien. "So this is our visitor," Morrison said, looking at Zip carefully. "It appears to be a juvenile of an unknown species. We will need to take it to our facility for study and evaluation." Chuck stepped between Morrison and Zip. "Hold on there, Jake. This is not some specimen for your lab. This is a child whose family was kidnapped by hostile aliens. The kid needs protection, not poking and prodding." Morrison frowned. "Chuck, you know the protocols. Any alien contact has to go through proper channels. We need to determine if this creature poses any threat and gather intelligence about its species and origins. Look at him, Jake. Does that look like a threat to you?" Chuck pointed at Zip, who was still wrapped in the blanket looking scared. "The real threat is whoever these Kethmori are. They are the ones enslaving innocent people." Morrison and his agents exchanged looks. They had worked with Chuck long enough to know that his judgment was usually right about these things. But they also had orders to follow and procedures to maintain. We still need to follow protocol, Chuck. The creature needs to come with us for proper evaluation and containment. Chuck crossed his arms and gave Morrison the look that had made alien warriors retreat in fear. That child stays here with me, Jake. That is not negotiable. Chuck Norris stood in the parking lot of his restaurant and looked at the building with pride. Roundhouse Grills had been his dream for 20 years, and now it was real. The big sign above the door showed his name in bold red letters and a picture of him doing his famous roundhouse kick. People came from all over Texas just to eat here and maybe catch a glimpse of the legend himself. At 83 years old, Chuck still looked like he could take on anyone half his age. His hair was white now, but his body was still strong and his eyes were still sharp. Most people thought he was just lucky with good genes, but the truth was much stranger. Back in the 1980s, the government had asked him to be part of a secret program. They gave him treatments that made him stronger and faster than any normal human. They said it was to protect America from threats that regular people could never handle. Chuck had spent 40 years fighting battles that the world never knew about. Alien scouts had been coming to Earth since the 1960s, and most of them were not friendly. The government had a special team to deal with these visitors, and Chuck was their best fighter. He had faced creatures from a dozen different worlds and won every time. But those days were supposed to be over now. He had officially retired 5 years ago and handed over his duties to younger agents. Tonight, Chuck wanted to visit his restaurant without causing a big fuss. Usually, when he showed up, customers would crowd around him asking for pictures and autographs. The staff would get nervous and the kitchen would slow down. He loved meeting his fans, but sometimes he just wanted to see how things ran when nobody knew he was watching. Chuck parked his truck in the back lot and walked toward the employee entrance. The cool Texas evening felt good on his skin, and he could hear the sounds of the busy restaurant through the walls. Laughter and conversation mixed with the clatter of plates and the sizzle of meat on the grill. It was exactly what he had hoped for when he opened this place. He used his key to enter through the back door and stepped into the kitchen area. The cooks were working hard over the hot stoves and nobody noticed him at first. Steam rose from the pots and the smell of barbecue sauce filled the air. Chuck smiled as he watched his employees doing their jobs well. These people were like family to him, and seeing them work with such care made him proud. Pete Williams, the restaurant manager, was checking orders at the pass window. Pete had been with Chuck since the very beginning, and was one of the few people who knew about Chuck's real past. He was a good man who kept the place running smooth when Chuck was not around. Pete looked up and saw Chuck standing there, but Chuck put a finger to his lips and Pete nodded without saying anything. Chuck moved through the kitchen quietly, watching everything. The servers were rushing back and forth carrying trays of food to the dining room. Maria Santos, the head chef, was calling out orders and making sure every plate looked perfect before it left the kitchen. Lisa Parker, one of his best waitresses, was telling jokes to the other staff while she waited for her order. Everything looked normal and busy, just the way Chuck liked it. He was about to go check on the dining room when he heard something that made him stop cold. It was a sound coming from somewhere near the back of the kitchen. A soft cry that seemed to come from the walk-in freezer. Chuck had hearing that was much better than normal people thanks to his government treatments. He could hear sounds that others could not, and this sound was definitely not human. Chuck stood perfectly still and listened carefully. The cry came again, and this time he was sure it was coming from inside the freezer. It sounded scared and desperate, like someone or something was in trouble. But it also sounded wrong somehow. The pitch was too high, and there was something about it that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. All his old training came flooding back to him in an instant. During his years with the secret program, Chuck had learned to recognize when something was not normal. His enhanced senses could pick up things that regular humans would miss. Right now, those senses were telling him that whatever was in his freezer was not from Earth. Chuck moved toward the freezer door slowly and carefully. He did not want to alarm his staff or cause a panic, but he needed to find out what was making that sound. Pete noticed him moving and started to follow, but Chuck held up his hand to stop him. Whatever was in there, Chuck wanted to handle it himself first. The cry came a third time, and now Chuck was certain. Something alien was hiding in his restaurant freezer. After 40 years of fighting creatures from other worlds, Chuck knew the sound of non-human distress when he heard it. But this was different from the hostile aliens he usually dealt with. This sounded young and frightened rather than dangerous. Chuck reached for the handle of the freezer door and paused. His retirement was supposed to mean no more alien encounters, No more secret missions, no more saving the world. He was supposed to be just a restaurant owner now living a quiet, normal life. But it seemed like his past was not ready to let him go just yet. He could hear his heart beating in his chest as he gripped the cold metal handle. Behind him, the normal sounds of the restaurant continued, but they seemed far away now. Chuck took a deep breath and prepared himself for whatever he might find. In all his years of fighting aliens, he had never found one hiding in a freezer full of frozen vegetables. The handle turned with a soft click, and Chuck slowly pulled the heavy door open. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of frozen food and something else, something that definitely did not belong in a Texas restaurant. The Kethmori fleet appeared in Earth's skies like dark clouds blocking out the sun. 200 warships took positions around the planet, each one bristling with weapons that could level entire cities. The largest ship positioned itself directly above Chuck's restaurant, as if Captain Vexthar wanted to make his revenge personal. Chuck stood in his parking lot, looking up at the alien armada with his hands on his hips. Around him stood the strangest army in galactic history, human soldiers mixed with alien refugees from dozens of worlds, all united in their determination to fight for freedom. Zip was beside Chuck, wearing a small helmet that Pete Williams had found for him. "You ready for this, little buddy?" Chuck asked, looking down at his young alien friend. Zip nodded seriously. "Ready, Chuck. My family would be proud to see humans and aliens fighting together." Colonel Morrison's voice crackled through Chuck's radio. "Chuck, we have the space station Texas Justice in position above the restaurant. The President has given you full command of all Earth forces. God help us all." Chuck keyed his radio and spoke in his calm Texas drawl. "This is Chuck Norris to all human and alien forces. Today we show the galaxy what happens when free people stand together against bullies. Let them know that Earth protects those who cannot protect themselves." The battle began when the Kethmori flagship fired a massive energy beam directly at Chuck's restaurant. But instead of destroying the building, the beam struck an invisible shield that surrounded the entire area. The shield technology was a gift from the alien refugees, who had combined their knowledge with human engineering. Chuck smiled as he watched the enemy weapon fail. Vexthar just made his first mistake. He let his anger control him instead of thinking smart. The space station Texas Justice rose from behind the moon where it had been hiding. The station looked like a giant version of Chuck's restaurant, complete with a massive neon sign that read, "Roundhouse Grills Galactic Defense Force." It was armed with hybrid human-alien weapons designed by Maria Santos and the refugee scientists. "Texas Justice to Chuck Norris," came the voice of the station commander. "We are ready to show these lizards some Texas hospitality." Chuck grinned. "Light them up, boys and girls." The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human fighters used tactics that the Kethmori had never seen before, combining raw courage with alien technology. The refugee ships fought with a desperation born from years of slavery and a hope for freedom they had never dared to dream. Chuck knew that the real fight would be won or lost on a personal level. The Kethmori respected strength above all else, and their entire empire was built on the idea that they were superior to other species. If he could defeat their strongest warriors in single combat, it would shatter their confidence and inspire their slaves to rebel. "Colonel, why need a ride up to that flagship?" Chuck said into his radio. "It is time to settle this the old-fashioned way." A modified fighter ship landed in the parking lot, and Chuck climbed aboard. Zip tried to follow him, but Chuck shook his head. "You stay here where it is safe, little buddy. I will be back before you know it." The fighter ship blasted off toward the Kethmori flagship, dodging energy beams and missile salvos. Chuck's pilot was Lisa Parker, who had learned to fly alien technology with the same skill she showed serving customers. "Hold on, Chuck," she shouted over the noise of battle. "I'm going to get you right to their front door." Lisa flew the fighter ship directly into the flagship's docking bay before the aliens could close the blast doors. Chuck jumped out of the ship and found himself facing a dozen Kethmori warriors in full battle armor. They raised their weapons, but Chuck was already moving. What happened next would be talked about in alien bars across the galaxy for centuries. Chuck Norris single-handedly fought his way through the most advanced warship in the Kethmori fleet, using nothing but his martial arts skills and his impossible determination. Every punch sent armored warriors flying through bulkheads. Every kick crumpled alien technology that was supposed to be indestructible. Chuck fought his way to the bridge where Captain Vexthar was waiting with his personal guard. The alien captain had grown even larger since their last meeting. and was wearing armor that sparkled with energy fields. His yellow eyes burned with hatred as Chuck stepped onto the bridge. "So the primitive human comes to die in the heart of my ship," Vexthar snarled. "You will regret making an enemy of the Kethmori Empire." Chuck cracked his knuckles and gave the alien captain his famous stare. "The only thing I regret, Captain, is that it took me this long to teach you some manners." The final battle between Chuck Norris and Captain Vexthar was epic in scope. They fought through the bridge, destroying control panels and computers with their struggle. Vexthar was stronger and had better weapons, but Chuck had something the alien could never understand. He had the righteous anger of someone protecting innocent children and the unshakable will of a free human being. When Chuck finally landed his legendary roundhouse kick on Vexthar's armored head, the sound echoed through the entire ship. The alien captain crashed through the main view screen and lay still on the deck. Around the bridge, his surviving warriors knelt in defeat, recognizing Chuck as their superior. Chuck keyed his radio and spoke to both fleets. "This is Chuck Norris aboard the Kethmori flagship. Captain Vexthar has been defeated and his fleet is standing down. Any ship that wants to continue fighting will have to deal with me personally." One by one, the Kethmori warships powered down their weapons. The alien warriors had seen their strongest champion defeated by a single human, and their confidence was shattered. Ships began breaking away from the fleet and heading back toward Kethmori space, carrying news of their incredible defeat. But the victory was bigger than just one battle. News of Chuck's triumph spread through alien communication networks at the speed of light. On worlds across the galaxy, enslaved species began to rise up against their Kethmori masters. The empire that had seemed unstoppable was crumbling as its slaves found the courage to fight for freedom. Chuck returned to his restaurant to find crowds of humans and aliens celebrating together. Zip ran up to him with tears of joy in his large eyes. "Chuck, you did it. The broadcasts say that my homeworld is free. My family is safe." Chuck knelt down and hugged the young alien. "That was the plan all along, little buddy. Nobody should have to grow up without their family." In the months that followed, Chuck's restaurant became the unofficial embassy for the new Galactic Freedom Alliance. Beings from hundreds of worlds came to meet the human who had sparked a revolution that freed countless slaves. The restaurant's menu now included dishes from dozens of alien cultures, and the staff had grown to include refugees from across the galaxy. Chuck still served the best chicken fried steak in Texas, but now he also served hope to beings who had never known freedom. The back dining room had been converted into a school where human and alien children learned together. Chuck often taught martial arts classes there, showing young beings of all species how to protect themselves and others. Zip grew up to become Earth's first alien-human ambassador, helping to build bridges between species that had never trusted each other before. He never forgot the day he met Chuck Norris in a freezer, full of frozen vegetables, or the lesson he learned about humans who would risk everything to protect a frightened child. The galaxy had learned something important from Chuck Norris and his restaurant staff. Humans might not have the most advanced technology or the biggest weapons, but they had something more powerful. They had the courage to stand up for what was right and the compassion to protect those who could not protect themselves. That combination made them the most dangerous enemies that bullies and tyrants would ever face. And in a small restaurant in Texas, the legend of Chuck Norris lived on, not as an internet meme or a movie star, but as the man who taught the universe that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, like sharing your warmth with someone who is cold, can change everything.